Prince Charles' Christmas card celebrates his trip to Stalinist Cuba, the only regime in the Western Hemisphere to outlaw Christmas. Britain's Prince Charles has chosen an Associated Press photo taken on his historic trip to Cuba for his Christmas card. The image by AP's Ramon Espinosa shows the heir to the British throne behind the wheel of a classic car in Havana, alongside his wife Camilla. Charles 71 visited Cuba in March in the first trip to the communist-run island by a member of the British royal family. Yet, in 1969, atheist Stalinist dictator, terror sponsor, and mass murderer, Democrats, Hollywood, and fake news media, free healthcare provider and liberator of Cuba from the mob, Fidel Castro outlawed the celebration of Christmas in his Bolshevik founded and run family slave plantation. The celebration of Christmas was reallowed only in 1998 as a concession to Pope John Paul's visit to Cuba and his concurrent condemnation of the US for the Cuba embargo. Between this famously anti-communist Pope, while berating the US for placing economic sanctions against communist Cuba, supported the US embargo of apartheid South Africa at the same time. In brief, for over 30 years, if caught celebrating Christmas in the place Prince Charles and Duchess Camilla chose to commemorate in their Christmas card, a Cuban could be nabbed by KGB-trained secret police, brutally bludgeoned, and thrown into a KGB-designed torture chamber. And lest anyone forget, despite all the cosmetic trimmings to the dupe, tourists, reporters, and academic analysts, Cuba is still run by the Cuban Communist Party, of which Raul Castro is first secretary. Prince Charles and Duchess Camilla not only rank as the first British royals to give Bolshevik Cuba with a visit, but upon that visit in March, and aping President Obama 3 years earlier posed for a photo in front of the image of mass murderer and faithful Bolshevik protege Che Guevara. The phrase faithful Bolshevik protege is not flippant. The Bolsheviks, lest we forget, sadistically murdered an entire family of Prince Charles' royal relatives, the Romanovs, in cold-blooded, including the women and children, as they screamed in terror and pleaded for mercy. In case Prince Charles somehow forgot that terrifying historical datum, perhaps a famous song by a famous subject of Prince Charles, Sir Michael Philip Jagger, can remind him of the famous atrocity. I stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was a time for a change, killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed in vain, sympathy for the devil, 1968. Nonetheless, according to Britain's ambassador to Cuba, Anthony Stokes, that royal visit to Bolshevik Cuba was a jolly good show. I think it has been a wonderful visit, and the first official royal visit to Cuba. I think that's highly significant. The solution to the world's problems lies behind the Iron Curtain, wrote Che Guevara, who often signed his correspondence Stalin too. In fact, so fanatical was Prince Charles and Duchess Camilla's photo props devotion to the Bolsheviks that he even applauded the Soviet slaughter of Hungarian freedom fighters in 1957. All through the horrifying Soviet massacre, Che dutifully parroted the Soviet script that the workers, peasants, and college kids battling Russian tanks in Budapest with small arms and Molotov cocktails were all fascists and CIA agents who all deserve prompt execution. Throughout the royal visit, commemorated in her Christmas card, Duchess Camilla, a world-renowned women's rights activist, seemed enchanted to the photographed graciously meeting the KGB-trained apparatchiks and admiring the handiwork of the regime, which ranks as the Western Hemisphere top jailer, torturer, and murderer of genuine women's rights activists. In fact, the regime that so enchanted Duchess Camilla jailed and tortured 35,450 Cuban women and girls for political crimes. This ranks as a totalitarian horror utterly unknown not only in Cuba under these unspeakable right-wing dictators you always hear about in the fake news media, but in the Western Hemisphere, some of these Cuban ladies suffered twice as long in Castro's Gulag as Alexander Solzhenitsyn suffered in Stalin's. The crime many of them committed in communist eyes was simply being related to an active regime opponent, jailing, torturing, and murdering people, particularly females, for the crime of being related to the enemies of the revolution. By the way, comes straight from the Bolshevik playbook. The practice was started by the Soviet Cheka and greatly expanded upon by Stalin during the Great Terror. Naturally, the Castros and Che Guevara adopted the practice with their own brand of gusto. Can someone out there please inform all those tourists to Cuba and all those visiting dignitaries from Obama to Prince Charles and Duchess Camilla that